Hello and welcome to episode 16 of the Comic Book Club. I am your host, Matt Lasik.
I'm your co-host, Kendra Forte.
And today we are finishing up our deep dive into the world of Watchmen.
Finally.
Before we jump into where we left off with issue 9, I have received some questions from my listeners that I will answer to clean up some lingering confusion before we finish this off. First question coming in, is Ozymandias a gymnast or something? What was with the TV performance in issue 7? So yes, that is part and parcel with his whole superhero deal. He's like a sort of like a Batman type of dude. So his backstory is explained more in an issue that we'll be talking about today. But yes, as well as being the smartest man on Earth, he is also an accomplished gymnast, which is how he can punch people in the face or whatever. Next question. Do these characters appear in other comics? As in, do they exist outside of Watchmen? So this is something that we talked about in earlier episodes. All of the main characters in Watchmen are based off of a corresponding character from Charleston Comics, which was a property that DC bought and eventually integrated into their multiverse, and then eventually into their one main timeline. So characters that are now popular, such as Blue Beetle, Captain Atom, The Question, Peacemaker, were once all part of the Charleston line and that interconnected universe. And then DC bought them and integrated those characters into their main line. So Alan Moore initially wanted to use those characters. In fact, this series was initially going to be called Who Killed the Peacemaker? And DC was like, we know you have a tendency to kill and or maim and or psychologically wound your characters, and we kind of want to use these in the future maybe, so how about you use some new characters? So, yeah, all of the Watchmen characters are technically original, but they're also based off of Charleston characters. And for a long time, they did not exist outside of Watchmen. So this was published in 1985-86. And it was considered its own self-contained story, fully contained in every sense of the word, until 2017, when Jeff Johns, one of my favorite authors, wrote a sequel called Doomsday Clock, which served to integrate the Watchmen characters into the main DC multiverse. In fact, they were hinting at it since 2016's Rebirth event, which featured the iconic button that's on the cover of issue 1 and everything. So yes and no. They for a very long time they existed in their own thing, and then very recently they crossed over. But since then they've mostly been sticking to their own timeline. There's a currently ongoing sequel comic called Rorschach that is Kendra made a face and I agree. It's in the Watchmen timeline, but it's a couple decades down the line, and it's being written by Tom King, who I am ambivalent about as an author. Next question. How old is Blake supposed to be at the time of his death? He doesn't look that old. I disagree. I think he looks pretty old because he's got white all over his temples. So the story takes place in the 80s, and we know that in the 40s, when he was part of the Minutemen, he was in his teens. So he's in mid to late 50s by the time of his death, which I think corresponds with how old he looks at the time. Does no one else find it gross and bad that John got with Laurie when she was first 16? I mean, yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
The story was written in the 80s, and when they get together, it's the 60s. But it's still gross. In our modern eyes, it is indeed still gross. With that, that's all the questions we have right now. If you have more questions, you can tweet us at cbbcpod or email us at cbbcpod@gmail.com. But with those questions out of the way, we are going to dive into issue 9. So issue 9, the start of issue 9 sort of recaps the end of issue 8. We see John showing up at Dan's house and taking Laurie to Mars. He kind of forgets that she needs to breathe. That's somewhat comedic. And then there's she kind of starts to freak out, and then has what I think is a very funny line where she realizes where she is, and she says, "I'm censoring it for the radio." She basically says, "Oh dang, I'm on Mars." John then takes her into his big glass castle that he's built and tells her that they're there to debate Earth's destiny. He talks more and clarifies a bit more about how about his nonlinear perception, and how, despite that, he still acts surprised and angry at times because, quote, everything is preordained, even my responses. I'll warn you now, listeners. I'm going to be doing a lot of direct quotes in this episode because these last couple issues are filled with a lot of big, heavy, iconic lines that I really like. Like this one, "We're all puppets. I'm just a puppet who can see the strings." Oof, chills. They have a very confusing conversation about time, about Laurie and Dan and their relationship, and about memories. Laurie, this is the Laurie-centric issue, so we see a lot of flashbacks into Laurie's life. We see her first memory, which is her parents arguing. Her parents, of course, being Sally, the first Silk Spectre. Thank you. It's confusing because her quote-unquote stage name is Sally Jupiter, which I keep thinking is her superhero name, but it's not. Her superhero name is Silk Spectre. So Laurie's first memory is seeing her mom, Sally, arguing with her husband, who was the Minutemen's publicist. She tells John that she doesn't think that the publicist is her dad. She thinks it's hooded justice. John claims that Laurie was his last reason to care about Earth, and now that reason is gone since she's sleeping with Dan. John then flexes his god powers a bit. He lifts his large glass castle out of the ground and flies it around Mars. He materializes water and milk out of thin air for Laurie. There's another flashback. We see... before that. Sorry, I skipped a note. John admits the thought of millions dying from war doesn't really bother him. He's just content to vibe on Mars.
You know what? I would be too. If I was a god on Mars, you'd never hear from me again.
Yeah. I mean, that's the main theme of his character and sort of about this series in general is how, given ultimate power, why would you... takes away your reason to care about things beneath you. When you're walking around, do you think about the ants you could be stepping on? Not really.
I do. Do you not?
Well, if there's a big swarm of them, then yeah, I'll avoid them, but I don't know. There's another flashback. We see Laurie in her in the phase where she is being trained by her mother. I think she's about 13. She walks in on her mom being visited by Hollis Mason, who was the first Night Owl, and Nelson Gardner, Captain Metropolis. And they're talking about being Minutemen and heroes and whatever. Another Minuteman by the name of Mothman arrives.
Mothman.
Yeah, well, he's not that comedic because he's very mentally unwell.
So am I. I'm still comedic.
Well, his is kind of sad. Yours is...
Also kind of sad.
Also kind of sad, but it's less obvious than his. He is basically not there at all. I think it's Alzheimer's or it's something similar to Alzheimer's. And it shakes Laurie to the bone because she is 13 and she says, Jesus, is this what I'm training for? Which, she's kind of got a point. You think about, boxers or football players and how a lot of the ones that survived are, very unwell because of the physical strain, the repeated concussions and blows to the head. Kind of the same vibe here. In the present, John and Laurie continue to argue about the value of man and life in general. And honestly, it's kind of basic in terms of the value of life. I mean, you read one god being... You read one human trying to convince a god being to care about other humans, and you read them all.
Nothing real fun here.
Yeah. We now see the Crimebusters meeting from Laurie's perspective. After the meeting, she meets the comedian for the first time. This is before she knows about Blake trying to rape Sally. So they talk, and Sally herself shows up because Laurie's 16, so her mother drove her to the superhero meeting. So Sally shows up. She's angry that Blake is talking to her daughter. And then as they drive away from the Crimebusters meeting, Sally confesses to Laurie about what happened. And then back in the present, John concludes that there's no reason for him to return to Earth or really care about life in general, because he is
a god on Mars.
He's just above it all. In 73, Laurie runs into Blake again at a function. She has now heard her mom's story and read Hollis Mason's book Under the Hood, which describes in detail about what he tried to do. She drunkenly, loudly confronts him over his attempted rape. Splashes a drink in his face. They, whatever. Drunk at a party things. You know how it is.
Yeah.
In the present, Laurie gets mad at John and starts to have a bit of a breakdown, and we're like flipping back and forth between her talking to John and like all of her flashbacks and all the images of Blake throughout her life. She tries to like take a step back and view her life non-linearly like John, and realizes, Blake is her father via a second consensual encounter. And let me tell you, I did not get that it was a second consensual encounter in my first reading. The first time I read this, I thought that he was her dad through rape. Which, I mean, it's a very different story if you think that. I think it's like briefly mentioned in the last issue that Sally was like, oh yeah, he came back years later and like we had a thing and then you were born. But I was reading through the Wikipedia article for Watchmen and it was like, oh, Blake's her dad through a second consensual encounter. Okay.
Okie dokie.
That really changes things from my perspective. Laurie then screams, and throughout this whole issue we've been seeing like snapshots of a bottle of perfume slowly falling to the ground. And it's at this point that she actually throws it. So it's another like non-linear thing.
It's like John with the photograph.
Yeah, it's just artsiness. The big glass castle then crumbles around him, and John changes his mind, seeing Laurie go through her whole life and have this big realization. He realizes that every life is a miracle. He makes some metaphor about like nuclear reactions producing gold and like how it's incredibly rare and how every life on Earth is as rare as that reaction.
Who cares?
I was about to say it's very nice.
Sure.
And that is issue 9. The text is a bunch of stuff detailing Sally. There's newspaper clippings, interviews, letters that she wrote and that were wrote to her, etc., etc. Just more good old world building. Issue 10. 3 more. We see President Nixon. This is an alternate timeline. Term limits were removed and Watergate never happened, so he's still in power in the 80s. He arrives at a nuclear bunker with the nuclear football to wait and see if it's needed. Do you know what a nuclear football is?
I have no idea what a nuclear football is.
I Googled this. So,
I looked at it. I was like, that's a shiny football.
Yeah, so the thing he's holding is basically a button that if he needs to make the decision to launch nukes and he's not like at the nuke launching site, he has the football so you can just pop it open and press the button and launch the nukes.
Why does it have to look like a football though?
That's just the nickname, is the nuclear football. It's got another special name, but I don't know. It's very weird seeing like old Nixon because I'm used to, because the only stuff that I see is from when he was in power and he was a relatively young man, and now here he is like 8 terms in and he's got white hair, and it's just a very different portrayal of Nixon than what's usually shown.
I wonder why they chose to go with old Nixon instead of who's the president in the 80s?
Oh boy, who was president in 1985? Ronald Reagan.
Why did they go with Nixon instead of Ronald Reagan?
Well, it's part of the whole alternate timeline thing. So, this is a timeline where America won Vietnam and they had nuclear superiority because of John's existence.
And none of that is a reason to keep President Nixon.
I don't know. Look, I talk about comic books. Do you think I know about politics? It's an alternate timeline. What do you want? Dan and Rorschach go back to Rorschach's apartment to get his stuff. This is after they break him out of jail. They run into his landlady who had been spreading false information to like news outlets about Rorschach, about like, oh, he like assaulted me and like always made passes at me and hit my kids and blah 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 blah. So now, Rorschach, we see this issue's weird because we keep seeing Rorschach like being human in little bursts and spurts, and I don't like that. I guess it's good writing because it shows it brings more realism to the character.
He's a three-dimensional character.
Yeah, but also I hate him.
He sucks. Yeah.
So
he would have been fully in his right to get her and beat the crap out of her.
Yeah, so he's basically about to beat the crap out of this lady, but like it's because her kids are also there that he doesn't. So Rorschach. He was an abused kid. And these kids are living in squalor because it's like a terrible, cheap apartment building in the slums of New York City in 1985. So
I guess the last thing you need is to see your mom.
Yeah. The one woman that's bringing in income to take care of you and is also just the only person that gives you attention. Being put in traction would not be good for your development. So he's like, I would beat you up, but I won't because your kids are here. And in the meantime, Adrian Veidt, a.k.a. Ozymandias, arrives at his Antarctic base. He does his ritual of observing all of TV at the same time on a big wall of screens. And it's pretty cool, in my opinion. We see that he uses this deluge of information to inform his stock habits.
If I could watch all of TV at the same time, I would also make some very powerful decisions.
Yeah, it's like, here, I'm just gonna read what it is. Let me see. First impression, oiled muscle man with machine gun, cut to pastel bears, Valentine hearts, juxtaposition of wish fulfillment, violence, and infantile imagery, desire to regress, be free of responsibility. This all says war, we should buy accordingly. So it's a lot of that stuff. Of with this, I can get a snapshot. There's a term I'm looking for of a slice. I can get a slice of all of what humans are feeling right now, and with that I can make informed decisions about what we're going to buy and sell and what we're going to develop.
And that's totally cool.
Yeah, that's totally not insider trading or anything. No, it's not.
It's not.
Yeah, it's just him using his big brain. This is just to show us that he have big brain. Back at Dan's apartment, he is using computers and corporate snooping to get information. Rorschach says that they should instead just be beating up people to get their info.
And Rorschach's back to Rorschach.
Yeah, Rorschach is of the belief that any information can be gained by going to bars and beating people up. The worst part is that later he's proven right. They argue. Dan snaps at Rorschach and is like, it's really hard being your friend, Which, yeah, it is.
It is.
Again, Rorschach shows a bit of humanity. He tries to show he cares. He apologizes for being difficult. And it's really off-putting. It's kind of sweet, but it's also off-putting. Because I really want to hate him.
And then Dan is like, yeah, you're right. We should go bust some heads.
Yeah. I think it's because, he's like, oh no, I've made Rorschach feel bad. If he feels too bad, he might put me in traction. So let's go vent that somewhere else. Meanwhile, we see the news vendor. Just again, our everyman.
I am in love with the news vendor.
Yeah, when he first shows up, he's kind of a jerkwad, but, ever since he gets the news that Russia invades the Middle East, he, slowly becomes a better person.
I just like that there's some dude.
Yeah.
It's not all action. It's not all superheroes. It's what's happening to the little man.
Yeah.
In this time.
That's the whole point of his character. He is the everyman.
And I am 100% here for it.
Yeah. He just kind of vibes and sells papers and yells about stuff. In this scene, we see him being accosted by religious nuts that are like, the world is ending. Have you found God yet? And he's like, this is New York City. Please leave me alone. Rorschach and Dan start visiting bars. They, there's a little bit of telephone. They find the guy who passed the payment and instructions to the guy who tried to kill Veidt. Turns out that he was given the errand by his boss at Pyramid Deliveries, which is one of the companies that was involved in Dan's corporate theory. Turns out a bunch of other people were, quote, in on things at Pyramid Deliveries, and they're all dead as well. So this one dude's freaking out.
They just killed the whole company. They're just like, you know what? Everyone, wipe them out. Anyone who knew anything, dead, gone.
So while Rorschach is putting the Mickey on this guy, Dan catches the eye of another guy in the bar, a guy who was wearing like the gang colors of the gang that killed Mason the first Night Owl, and he learns from him that Mason's dead. And this is a very tough moment to read. He loses it. Dan just like fully snaps.
He was a very sweet old man.
Yeah. Rorschach tries to comfort him in his own Rorschach-y way. Which is to say he's a freak and I hate him. I don't know. It's weird because he's like, it should be comforting to know that this fits into my mask killer theory because that's important right now. I don't know. It's weird.
He's trying.
We see on the island, that's capital T, capital A, capital I, the island. All of the artists and scientists are on a ship, like a big cruise ship taking them home from the island. They think that they've been filming a movie this whole time. All the genetic manipulation and building of this giant creature that we got a glimpse of a couple issues ago. They think that this is all for a movie.
What scientist was like, I'm going to build, and they'll get into the specifics of this creature later, but I'm going to build this creature
for a movie.
So realistic for a movie. And then later, when they're done with the movie, I don't care what happens.
I mean, money? It's a lot of money. We see the writer and the artist from the last issue, or from 2 issues ago, pardon me. One of which is like, we've seen his face on a bunch of missing posters. They're boning in a closet on the ship when they find a bomb, and it goes off, and it kills everyone, basically just kills all the witnesses of everyone that had seen this creature being made.
Now don't you feel dumb?
What, me? Or the
the people on the ship.
Yeah. Rorschach and Dan go to Veight's office. They find it, and in fact his whole building, empty. They also find evidence of Veight being worried of some sort of upcoming crisis.
Like the crises we're in the middle of weren't enough already.
Well, I think it is the crises that they're in, like the threat of nuclear war and the economy and whatever.
Yeah, so him being worried about some kind of crisis shouldn't have been this earth-shattering thing. This is such a big piece of news that Veight was worried.
Yeah. Dan hacks into Veight's computer by guessing his password.
Smartest man alive.
It's like the same level of complexity of like, what was your childhood dog? Like it's that level of what's the password. And you like.
Does it tell us what the password is?
Yes. It's this whole thing of because his name is Ozymandias, which I think is the.
Is it just Ozymandias? Is his password just Ozymandias?
Ozymandias is his password is Ramses II, which is the Egyptian name for Ozymandias. I don't remember who Ozymandias is historically. But yeah, it's like, come on. It's like if I was a superhero and my name was like Zeus, if my computer password was Jupiter. It's like, come on.
It's just one degree of separation. He's like, that works.
If I was the smartest man on Earth, my password would be a string of random numbers and letters that's like 30 characters long, and I would just memorize that because I'm the smartest man on Earth. That's like how would you guess that password? You couldn't because it's like 30 characters long. It turns out that Pyramid Deliveries is owned by Veight, which is like a huge revelation. And all of the other companies that are connected to Pyramid Deliveries that are in Dan's theory are also owned by Veight, which leads to the conclusion that he's been behind literally everything.
Man just went crazy.
Man's just went wild. Go crazy. Go stupid. Dan and Rorschach head out to confront Veight at his Antarctic base. On the way, Rorschach mails his journal with all of the evidence in it to the New Frontiersman, which is the only people I can trust. The New Frontiersman, for those who don't remember, is the far right-wing newspaper that is Rorschach's favorite newspaper. we see a scene of them getting it, but they immediately disregard it as junk mail because the first note in Rorschach's journal, instead of something important to this conspiracy, is about a dead dog that he found. Great job, Rorschach! You really are the protagonist of this series.
I mean, it's his journal. It can be filled with whatever he wants.
Yeah, but, like, you could have put in a bookmark or something.
Yeah,
or, like,
I
ripped
agree.
out the unimportant pages. You could have done more.
There could have been another idea had here in conjunction with this one.
It's like that meme. Honestly, it's like that meme that was going around a little while ago of, like, a girl's journal from the day of the moon landing that was like,
oh, yeah.
Sally was mean to me today. Joe was cute. School was hard. Also, a man landed on the moon. Good night, journal, or something like that. It has that same energy. Dan's owl ship flies all the way to Antarctica, but they crash because it's Antarctica and it's cold, and they end up taking cute little hover bikes the rest of the way.
Cute.
Vite is watching their approach. Bum, bum, bum. And that's the end of issue 10. The text at the end of this issue is sort of in-company information about Vite's line of Ozymandias action figures, as well as promotional material for his nostalgia fragrance. And yeah, it's just, I don't know. It's just more cool world building. That's all that the text is, really. The text stopped being important when it stopped being, like, excerpts from Under the Hood. Because Under the Hood had a lot of details about, like, the prehistory of the superheroes. Before, like, it's more than anything that's actually shown in the picture parts, but after that, it's not really anything else important. Issue 11, Dan and Rorschach continue to get closer to Vite's base. Dan doesn't think that Vite's end goal is, like, to destroy the world, because the stuff that he found in his office implies that he has more plans for the future. So he comes to the conclusion that, like, oh, this isn't just about, blowing up everything. This is about something else. Vite leaves his TV screen wall, which he was using to view their approach, and we see him press some sort of large button, and there's a large flash of light off panel. The news vendor continues to be a news vendor, and Kendra, we see gay people!
Love gay people!
There's a lesbian couple, and we see them. We saw one of them, we had seen one of them throughout the series, but she is, I believe the term is butch?
Yes, butch is the term. Okay,
she is butch. So I think they refer to her as either Joey or Josie, and it's only in this issue where her girlfriend shows up and calls her Josephine, and we're like, duh! Gay? So yeah, that's exciting. Vite meets his staff in what I call his jungle orb.
It's a very pretty orb.
Yeah, it's like a terrarium greenhouse thing that's like a self-contained jungle environment full of plants and animals, but it's in the Antarctic. So that's cool. And this is the Vite issue, so it's a lot of flashbacks to his life. So he talks to his base staff about his life, about how he was a prodigy genius since childhood, and about how he was inspired by Alexander the Great. At 17, both of his parents died, and he gained a massive inheritance from them, but he decided to give it all away, and he left America to follow the trail of Alexander's conquest through Eurasia and Africa. Meanwhile, the couple that we now know is gay are arguing in New York City, and they're starting to sort of attract attention. Eventually, Vite returns to America and begins his adventuring life as Ozymandias, taking inspiration from Alexander the Great and his contemporaries. At this point, the staff that he had been pontificating to are all dead because the drink that he gave them was poisoned.
Did not realize this.
Oh, you thought they were just vibing?
Yeah.
Same here. The first time I read this, I swear I thought that, like, he mentions way later in, like, one line of a big paragraph of text, oh yeah, also I poisoned my staff. But yeah, on my first read, I was like, oh, they're just kind of sitting there. I guess
they were, like, just chilling.
I guess his speech was just that boring. But Vite ends up opening his jungle orb, burying their bodies and the whole jungle habitat under the snow. In front of the news vendor's stall, Dr. Malcolm Long's wife, I forget her name. In my notes, I just called her Mrs. Long.
We shall continue to just call her Mrs. Long.
We will call her Mrs. Long. Mrs. Long confronts Dr. Long in front of the news vendor stall. Dan and Rorschach reach Vight's base, and they enter through the opened orb. They sneak through his base. There's like 3 pages that's no words. It's just imagery of them sneaking through like the huge, decadent, high-tech base, and they end up getting behind him while he's eating dinner. But of course, since he's Veidt, he absolutely wrecks them. He like pins Rorschach's hand to the table with a fork and then breaks Dan's nose with a serving tray. Cause he's Ozymandias, the smartest man on Earth.
Which really wouldn't correspond to great fighting skills, but also apparently he's a trained gymnast.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that's sort of covered in like the whole, I walked through Africa and Asia and whatever, following the footsteps of Alexander the Great. And also I learned martial arts.
And also now I'm strong.
Yeah. Veidt starts talking to them about his history with Blake, like sort of just observing him throughout over the years. He talks about how adventuring started to feel hollow to him as time passed. He says Blake's outburst at the Crimebusters meeting, and for those of you that don't remember, at the Crimebusters meeting, an older Captain Metropolis was like, "We need superheroes again," and Blake's like, "That's dumb." So he says it's more complex than that. Veidt claims Blake's outburst at the Crimebusters meeting opened his eyes, and that he realized it was up to him, the smartest man on Earth, to save humanity, no matter the cost. Back in New York City, Dr. and Mrs. Long, their confrontation kind of turns into an argument as the gay couple's argument becomes violent. This is a really powerful part for me, so I'm gonna take some time with it. Mrs. Long is trying to tell Dr. Long, like, Malcolm, dude, you gotta pay more attention to me. I don't want to deal with quote, screw-ups and manic depressives in this relationship. I'm what should be most important. And Long explains that her name's Gloria, by the way, because this is where I put it in my notes, because I have a large quote from this conversation. Malcolm explains to Gloria that he can't stop himself from trying to help others. The quote is, "Gloria, please, I have to. In a world like this, I mean, it's all we can do. Try to help each other. It's all that means anything. Please understand. I'm sorry. It's this world. I can't run from it." I just... chills. I really like this, because it's... I think this is a good example of, like, the human spirit, because the last time we saw Malcolm Long, it was after he had tried to treat Rorschach.
And he went a little insane.
Yeah, and it kind of broke him and made him... It put him in like a depressive swing, but now he's on the backside of it, and it's given him the realization that's what's most important on this world is each other, and that, he sort of rededicated his life to helping others, which is a big change, because previously he was helping others, especially Rorschach, but we saw that he was only doing it for his own personal gain. He was only helping Rorschach to get like a book deal or whatever and become famous and rich, and now... somehow, miraculously, after being broken by Rorschach, he's rebuilt himself as a caring man. And I really like this bit.
It's all about rebuilding.
Yeah. I just really like it. I just really like the scene. Back in Antarctica, Veidt talks about his thoughts on the threat of nuclear conflict and its ramifications on the common man. Eventually...
Veidt, what do you know about the common man? Tell me. Tell me what you know about the common man.
He did dump all of his life savings and go to Africa or something.
That's not the common man.
Yeah. He's also still the smartest man on Earth.
It's like that one meme. It's one banana, Michael. What could it cost? $10?
Eventually, Veidt was able to see the whole picture, how like every aspect of the world influenced every other aspect, and he was able to sort of deduce the most probable future, and he figured out a plan to stop total nuclear annihilation. At this point in his life, he very easily built up his corporation. Again, he's not the common man, and he began using his sort of publicity sales to begin financing research into dimensional technology. So like teleportation and alternate energy sources and all that. In NYC, More people are taking notice of the very physical now fight between the gay couple, including the news vendor and the detectives from the earlier issues, one of which is now suspended for bungling the Cape arrests. Veidt continues to detail how he manipulated his companies to give the people on the cancer list their cancer. He talks about...
So they all worked for Veidt, and he gave them all cancer?
All the people on the list, which included Dr. Manhattan's former girlfriend, his kid sidekick, and one of his biggest villains, an earlier reveal in earlier issues was that they all had cancer, and that was part of the thing that drove John away from Earth.
Yeah, and then it turned out that they all had worked for the same company.
I don't know if they all worked for the same company, but they all worked for companies that were owned by Veidt. And he had manipulated them into positions where he could give them cancer. He talks about how he purchased the island, that's again with capital T and capital I, and how he murdered Blake. As we saw in issue 1, as Blake had sort of stumbled into this thing. Which again is, I thought on my first reading that Blake was a part of it, and that he had had a moral relapse after realizing what Veidt was going to do. But no, Blake
just ended up there accidentally.
Yeah, he just kind of tripped his way onto the island and then saw the whole plan.
Which sucks.
Yeah.
That's a terrible thing to trip into.
Yeah. The teleportation tech that Veidt had developed was based off of John's abilities, but without John's conscious guidance, it was very limited, and anything that was organic either died upon re-entry or fused into a wall or something and exploded. And then Veidt confirms what we had saw about the island in previous issues, that a, quote, collection of missing artists and scientists working upon a monstrous new life form. His plan was to convince the world governments that Earth was being attacked by aliens so that they would stop fighting each other and instead prepare for a hypothetical invasion. He admits
it's no longer hypothetical if you actually create an alien.
Yeah, well, he only created one, so the idea is that if there's one, then there's more, and they're coming for us. So instead of pointing bombs at each other, we got to point the bombs outwards. He admits to hiring his own attacker, again through shell corporations. He had hired a man to attack him, to put him above Rorschach's suspicion, even going so far as to feed him the cyanide capsule that he chokes on in an earlier issue. Which, jeez, man! His final part of the plan was to build the monster and then teleport it into New York City, with its death triggering a psychic bomb that would kill half the residents of the city. Dan basically said, well, thank God we got here before you did so we could stop you. And bone-chilling line here, this is the big thing that put Watchmen on the map for me when I first read it. Veidt says, stop me? I did it 35 minutes ago. Do you remember, audience, when we saw him push that button near the start of this issue? Mind being blown. He isn't any villain. He already did it. That's why he's explaining it all to you, idiots, because you can't stop him. And then we see the explosion. So it turns out the stuff that we had seen concurrently, we actually were seeing 35 minutes into the future. So we see the explosion. It kills basically every non-superhero character that we've met. Including...
No, not the gay couple and Dr. and Mrs. Long.
And the
news vendor.
The news vendor and the detectives. And we see in his last moments, the news vendor tries to protect the kid that he had been complaining about /to for the whole series. And then the last panel is just pure white. Very, very moving, in my opinion. And then the text block is just an interview with Veidt after his retirement.
Dude, why?
Yeah, well, that's to stop nuclear war. He sacrificed millions to save billions.
I feel like you didn't have to kill half of New York City. You could have... He talks about later, the ones who survived all, go insane. Mm-hmm. You could have just made them all go insane. That's fine.
Yeah,
It could have been a regular King Kong moment when it just kind of takes over the Empire State Building and swats at airplanes or whatever.
I think two ideas for that, and they're both to increase the veracity of the threat. First, like, if it had just went there and gotten no fatalities, then it wouldn't be as taken as seriously of a threat. If it just, like, shows up and dies and they're like, oh, we have nothing to worry about. Same thing if it shows up and is alive and, like, they do a kill King Kong, basically, and they could just easily kill it. Because the Veidt doesn't want... If it shows up and it's alive and they can't kill it, then that's not Veidt's end goal, because then he has an alien monster on the loose. If it shows up and they easily kill it, then they have nothing to worry about, because if any more of them show up, it's like, oh, well, we killed that one, we can just kill the other ones. So it needs to be both a big enough threat, i.e. killing millions, and also no longer a constant threat. It has to be a future potential threat for his plan to work.
Wait, okay, since all of his teleportation stuff made organic matter die as soon as it's teleported, did the alien get there and die immediately? How is this still a threat? How does anyone who is seeing this from the outside go, aliens who get here and die immediately?
Well, it died because it materialized inside Madison Square Garden, as we see in the start of issue 12. The first 6 pages are just art of the squid monster fused into the streets of New York City and all of the dead bodies. And it is bone-chilling. This art is grotesquely beautiful. And yeah, this is where we see that there had been a concert in Madison Square Garden with sold-out seats, and Veidt had put the thing right smack dab in the middle of it. So yeah, again with building the threat, the idea is that this was a fluke, and that, like, oh, they might refine their technology and come in force.
I would hate to be the test alien that just merges with the city.
Yeah. Although, actually, there's more to that. We'll talk about it more when we get to it. Because I just remembered something else that helps build the threat. About, like, oh, what if it's just an explorer, or what if it was just an accident?
Oopsie daisies.
So John and Laurie are there in New York City as they teleported in after the event had already taken place. And although we had seen them leave Mars many issues ago, the tachyon residue from the event had messed up John's teleportation. Laurie is shell-shocked, understandably so. John's being John.
John's like, whoops, everyone's dead. Laurie's like, oh crap, everyone's dead.
Yeah, so John back traces the tachyon trail to the Antarctic, as Laurie is freaking out. Dan still thinks Veidt is lying, and he asks, like, trying to poke holes into Veidt's story, he asks what would have happened if the attacker had shot him first instead of the secretary. And Veidt just says, oh, I would have caught the bullet. Because
I am the smartest man alive, and that somehow correlates to catching bullets.
Because I'm Adrian freaking Veidt, my guy. I catch bullets.
I catch bullets. I break your nose. I build alien monsters.
He details how the brain of the squid monster was cloned from a dead psychic, and it was made to be like a brain bomb. Brain blast! Aw, Jimmy! Oh, Jimmy,
You almost made me break FCC regulations there.
Oh, Jimmy, there's a squid in New York City. The brain bomb also included a bunch of information from the writers and artists about a fictional alien world, so that those that survived the initial burst would have been driven insane. And this is, I think, also builds upon the threat, because it's not just like... Because then no one can be like, oh, this was just an explorer or a scientist that accidentally got into our world. Like, the psychic bomb included images of, like, a war-torn world, a war-torn alien world, and, like, an intention to come and conquer Earth. At this point, John and Laurie teleport outside the base. The tachyon particles are making John even less linear. The two of them find out that Veidt did everything. And John sort of chases Veidt through his base, and Veidt recreates the experiment that created John in an attempt to destroy him. And it's almost like the exact same panel of John being like split apart by the atom.
It was insane. I was so shocked. I was staring at that panel for 2 minutes, like, wow. Vite. I don't have the words to say this.
Yeah, it's nuts. Laurie then shows up and shoots Vite, and he catches the bullet!
He's like, wow, I guess I could do that.
He wasn't BSing. He was telling the truth. He just caught the bullet.
He said something along the lines of, like, that's one of the other things that I
didn't think that would work.
Wasn't sure about.
Yeah, because he blows up John and he's like, huh.
I didn't think that would work.
And then he immediately catches the bullet and says, huh, I didn't think that would work either.
Oh, well.
This last issue is just nuts. Vite then starts to grandstand about how the other capes are no longer needed in his post-war world. And then in the middle of his speech, John rematerializes as a giant and just grabs him with his large blue fist. And then he says, this ice-cold line, the world's smartest man means no more to me than does its smartest termite. Eat him up, John!
Get him, John!
Vite then turns on his screen wall, revealing that his plan worked and all the hostilities between countries have been ended. And this is really the crux of the story, as all of these heroes, with their morals, are forced to compromise. The heroes can't take Vite in and expose his plan, or else the world would just collapse into war again. So they have to just accept the fact that Vite killed millions to save billions. And this is the real crux of the story, is the deconstruction of the common superhero black and white philosophy. That it doesn't really work in real world terms. And yes, I know I'm saying real world when it comes to like a giant squid monster and a blue man with his dong out. I know what I'm saying.
Except Rorschach,
who
it doesn't work on.
Everyone agrees except Rorschach, predictably. He walks off with the intent of going back to America and telling everyone. John disappears, and Vite just kind of leaves the room, telling a shell-shocked Dan and Laurie to make themselves at home. In their shock, Dan and Laurie bone.
I'm so sick of them having sex in just any situation.
They can only find comfort in each other. I think it's kind of sweet. Rorschach is starting to get the hover bike ready to get back to the ship, to get back to America. And John basically says, you know I can't let you do that. And Rorschach's like, all right, kill me. And John does. This is another very iconic scene, is like the, kill me! And then John just kind of waves his hand and Rorschach is gone.
There's blood on the ground. I think Rorschach exploded.
All that's left is blood and a fedora.
What does the common man boil down to except blood and a fedora?
Yeah. John then walks through the base. He sees the screen wall where all the news anchors are still talking about the new piece. He sees Dan and Laurie sleeping in each other's arms. And he eventually comes across Vite meditating in front of a model of the solar system. Vite talks about how he's not really a monster, and his meditation is so that he can feel every death and see every face that he killed. And John says that he neither condemns nor condones his actions. He at the very least understands them.
As I expected John to.
Yeah.
Didn't see Vite going crazy and killing half of New York City. That didn't cross my mind when I started reading Watchmen.
Yeah.
However, John being killing other people, okay.
Yeah. Well, we already saw him blowing up fields full of men during the Vietnam in an earlier issue. So John's okay with killing.
Which is why I was he would do something like that. I'm not surprised at all that John is yeah, I see you, dude.
Yeah.
Cool.
Dr. Manhattan supports the death penalty. John begins to leave. He says he's going to leave the solar system, and he says he might create his own life just to see what happens. Vite asks if he did the right thing, if everything worked out in the end. And then this is another very powerful quote. Nothing ends, Adrian. Nothing ever ends. Which, very touching here, but they milk the hell out of it in Doomsday Clock, which is the sequel. They just keep bringing that line up. because it's Dr. Manhattan's last line before he leaves that solar system.
Vite's like, what do you mean? What does that mean?
And then just does like the meme of like the dude holding the peace sign up, and then it just disappears. Fast forward a month, Dan and Laurie, now married under the new names Sam and Sandra Hollis, get it, Hollis Mason, visit Sally, who is still retired in, I think, Florida. Laurie then confronts Sally about Blake being her real dad, and they reconcile. Sam and Sandra leave, and they start making plans to begin adventuring again. And the last we see of Sally is her tearfully kissing her only picture of Edward Blake, who I guess she really loved in the end. I don't know. We saw a bit of this theme of like time changing things earlier when she was on the phone with Hollis Mason a couple issues ago.
Yeah.
In New York City, posters are being put up that read "One World, One Accord." There's evidence everywhere of American and Russian cooperation. At the New Frontiersman, they pick up Rorschach's journal, and the final shot mimics the first shot of a smiley face with a little drop of red on it. And that
was a cool shot.
Yeah, they have a lot of that in this thing of like something round with a little like splash, and it's always the same shape splash. And that was Watchmen.
Just in time.
Yeah, really. Well, this is the final thing. I had a whole bunch of headlines that I didn't even get to talk about. I'll save them for next week. Yeah. Thoughts?
This wasn't fun. I didn't enjoy this.
Yeah, it's
I joined this show for fun, cool comics, not moral dilemmas.
Well, I was gonna say we'll do something fun next week or next time, but I don't. Well, no, it'll be fun.
I like Invincible.
Yeah, it's well, I guess we'll talk about it now. In 2 weeks, we will be covering the first major storyline of Invincible. So that'll be issues 1 through 13. Next week, we'll probably be talking about some of the background stuff of Invincible and why I really like it. But it's collected in... I was just looking it up and I forgot all of the information of where I can find it. Issues 1 through 13 are, of course, available digitally. It's being published. It was published by Image Comics. In trade paperback form, they are available as volumes 1 through 3 or as the Invincible Ultimate Collection Hardcover Volume 1 or included in Invincible Compendium Volume 1, which is issues 1 through 47.
I think I have the compendium.
Yeah, there's a bunch of different ways to find Invincible, either in single issue form or in trade paperback form, and we will be covering issues 1 through 13 in 2 weeks, which is the first sort of major storyline. Again, next week we'll be doing headlines, answering your lingering questions about Watchmen, talking about Invincible, all sorts of stuff. If you have any questions that you want us to answer, any suggestions for future stories we could read, if you just want to tell us something cool about comic books that you want us to talk about, you can email us at cbbcpod@gmail.com, or you can tweet us at cbbcpod. That's at cbbcpod on both. Yeah, that has been Watchmen. 3 episodes. Wow, that is huge.
That's a lot of episodes.
That is a lot of episodes for one storyline, but it's a big storyline. So now, dear listener, you are prepared to go out and watch the movie. If you want to see an inferior version, you can read Doomsday Clock, which is a sequel to Watchmen and brings that universe into the mainstream DC universe. There's a whole bunch of prequel series called Before Watchmen that help flesh out that universe.
Like it needed any more world building.
Yeah. There's a current ongoing prequel series called Rorschach, being written by Tom King, which is like a problematic character and a problematic author, but it's interesting. It doesn't feature any Walter Kovacs, so you're safe on that. Yeah. I've been your host, Matt Lasik.
I've been your co-host, Kendra Forte.
And until next time, Excelsior!